Welcome back to Sweetspot Safari. I'm Ben and this is John, your Sweetspot hunters. So just before we get into the how of this podcast or show, just a quick recap on why sweet spots matter. I think one way of framing this is that our environment today for humans is radically different to where we evolved. We evolved as hunter-gatherers in the African plains, and our context, as you can appreciate, is very, very different. So historically, we lived on an empty planet where technology was constant and material resources were scarce. But if we fast forward to today, we now live on a full planet with continuous change and an abundance of resources and potential for well-being. So this is a radical shift. And all of this shift has led to things like climate change, inequality, mental health crises, you name it. Part of this context shift has created many of our problems, which are all interconnected. And then what's happened to us, as individuals and cultures? I think you could argue that we've become more polarized, more tribal, on all sorts of different topics and themes. But I think the way through this isn't more of the same. More of the same thoughts, behaviors, conversations, or solutions that actually, created them in the first place. It's about perhaps stepping back, seeing different perspectives, thinking critically, and finding nuance in complex subjects. So hopefully that's a nice recap to why sweet spots matter and why we exist to do this, John. But over to you for the how.
Yeah, and this, thank you very much, Ben. This shouldn't take too long, but yeah, building on your points here is that we're trying to find an area, right, or help you find an area where we've called it a sweet spot, but it's away from these polar extremes or opposites, etc. Because even though these extremes can, in certain circumstances, by the way, be very helpful in the short term, long term, they're not really sustainable. And in fact, actually, what it does do is it can actually sap your energy. So that's, again, the sort of context of what we're trying to do. So I'll just give you a few sort of example topics that we're going to think about and explore as we go through the Sweet Spot Safari. We're going to look at topics or clusters of topics or even themes. And to give you some examples, they could be, for instance, individualism, as opposed to collectivisms. It could be rigid structures versus fluid structures. And I don't just mean in the physical sense, I mean in the managerial sense and the organizational sense. We can have energy versus lethargy, something I'm very passionate about, some of the training that I've been involved in with energy leadership. Process versus creativity, which of course I alluded to around myself in the first intro or the second intro video. And here's another one, probably a bit more esoteric, but experience versus enthusiasm, for instance. Now, these aren't necessarily polar opposites, and they're not necessarily, diametrically away from each other, but it's just to provide some context. And you'll see that nuance is very important because some of those are soft and some of those are hard. And hopefully that's already got you thinking about topics of your own. So the ultimate aim really here is for us to discuss this way and hopefully trigger the listeners' brains to think a bit deeper. And as Ben said earlier, think a bit more critically about their own situation, hopefully raise their own self-awareness and start thinking about how they in their own lives can be more productive, a word that of course is very generic and is used in all sorts of areas, but more satisfying is probably a better way of saying. So they feel satisfied, because when humans feel satisfied, there's no doubt that the work they're involved in will be better. The two are inexorably linked in that respect. So that's really what we're going to do. So that's the end of introduction 3, and the next video you'll see will be when we start to really explore some of these themes and topics. So please subscribe, please also share with your friends, and please tune in to the next podcast. So that's goodbye from John. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, John. And yeah, just one final mention is that some of these conversations will be simply between me and you, exploring these different patterns or trends or whatever we want to call them. But we will also invite on explorers as well. So we want to have experts and specialists from different domains come in and explore their sweet spots within their field of expertise. So this will really be just a wide variety of conversations where some will be fairly shallow, others will be a deep dive, and hopefully there'll be something for everyone. So from my point of view, that's all from me.